So in this episode, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of using EBS. So with your do's, these are your best practices, and your don'ts, these are common pitfalls to avoid when using the EBS service. So first of all, create backups. So create your snapshots of your EBS volumes in order to back up that data and prevent data loss. So this is done by either creating the EBS snapshots, which we talked about in the previous episode, or using the AWS backup service. So in the event of a volume getting corrupted or accidentally deleted, having a recent snapshot or backup ensures that you can recover your data and continue operations with minimal downtime. Now, I've worked with a lot of customers over the years that use EBS, and you would be surprised at the number of customers that actually don't create regular backups. And I've been on those very difficult calls where I've had to explain to customers that with AWS, under the shared responsibility model with EBS, the managing and protecting the data falls under the customer's responsibility. So you as the customer using the EBS service, you're responsible for actually making sure that data is backed up. And for this reason, I would definitely recommend, if there's one thing that you take away from this whole multi-series, is make sure you're backing up your data across the EBS service. Don't be that customer that has to go ahead and explain to either your CFO or any of your directors or even a client of your own that unfortunately the data has been lost, and this could be either due to accidental deletion on your part or possibly to a hardware component failure under the underlying infrastructure. So there's a very easy and simple workaround. Just create your EBS snapshots, whether that's manually through the EBS service or automated with your AWS backup service. Another important reason for creating EBS backups, such as snapshots or using the AWS backup service, is what's called a loss volume. So the volume on EBS volumes, this is replicated across multiple servers within an availability zone. However, EBS volumes can be lost, and this happens when multiple underlying hardware issues impact a volume simultaneously, and this will be internally at the back end. So when the volume is lost, it basically on the console you'll see it going into error state. And basically when a volume is lost, you can't restore a volume that's in an error state. The volume is gone. And as I've mentioned previously with the AWS shared responsibility model, you as the customer are responsible for protecting and managing that data. So if a volume is in error state, AWS unfortunately have no way of recovering that data. So you can either replace the volume using a backup or create a new EBS volume. So again, if the volume is in error state, there's no way of recovering that data. In order to recover the data, you're going to need to use a backup that you previously created. For this reason, this is my top best practice with EBS. So second of all, regularly clean up any unused or unnecessary EBS volumes and snapshots, and this is going to help you manage your costs and avoid clutter. So remember, with your EBS volumes, you're paying for the storage used by the volumes and snapshots. So if you have a volume that you no longer use or a snapshot that's outdated, it's best to delete them. So remember, snapshots are incremental. So you only need the latest snapshot in order to restore the volume to that point in time. So before you do delete any resources, ensure that the data is no longer needed or is backed up elsewhere. So you should be reviewing and removing unattached volumes and unnecessary snapshots in order to optimize your resource usage and bring your storage costs down. The third best practice for EBS is use the correct volume type. So as we've seen, EBS offers several different volume types, and these are each designed for different use cases and performance needs. So for example, with your provisioned IOPS SSD volumes, so your IO1 and IO2, these are designed for IO intensive applications, so like your large relational databases, whereas your general purpose, your GP2 and GP3 SSD volumes, these will offer a balance of price and performance for a wide variety of transactional workloads. And then you have your HDD volumes, so your throughput optimized ST1 and your cold HDD volumes. And these are low cost magnetic storage, and these are ideal for sequential read and write workloads. So when you choose the right volume type for your workload, this is going to ensure optimal performance and cost efficiency. If you haven't seen our previous episode, have a look at the episode where I go through the different factors that can impact your volume performance and use the workflow that's going to help you identify the correct volume type for your workload. Fourth, we have monitoring the performance of your EBS volumes. So by monitoring the performance of your EBS volumes, this is going to help you to understand if you have the correctly sized volume for your workload. So use the EBS CloudWatch metrics that we previously covered in another episode in order to understand if your volume is correctly sized for the workload that it's running. And fifth, use Compute Optimizer. So use this service, as we previously discussed in another episode, to get your volume recommendations and use its recommendations in order to tune the volume's performance and reduce costs. So moving on to our EBS don'ts. So these are common pitfalls to avoid when using the EBS service. So first of all, do not neglect EBS encryption. So not encrypting your EBS volumes, this can expose sensitive data to unauthorized access. As we discussed in the EBS encryption episode, EBS provides the ability to encrypt your data at rest and in transit between EC2 instances and your EBS volumes. And it's a best practice to always enable encryption by default for EBS volumes in order to enhance the data protection and meet compliance requirements. Next, don't use a single volume strategy. So relying on a single EBS volume for all your data can lead to performance bottlenecks, and it can increase the risk of data loss. So it's often better to use multiple volumes and distribute your data based on usage patterns. So for example, you might use one volume for your operating system, another for your application data, and another for logs. And this can help improve performance and make it easier to manage backups and snapshots for your workloads. 4, don't overlook volume initialization. So we talked about this previous in our data protection under the snapshots episode. So when you create a new volume from a snapshot, there's a need to initialize the volume before you can achieve the maximum performance. And this process, known as initialization, is done in order to reduce that I/O latency, that first touch penalty, which we previously discussed. If you don't have time to pre-warm or initialize the volume, what you can use there is your FSR enabled snapshots. So if you're not sure what those FSR snapshots are, head back and have a look at our previous episode where we discussed that. So finally, don't misunderstand SLA limitations. So AWS provides a service level agreement, an SLA, that guarantees a certain level of availability for EBS. And it's important to understand the limitations of this SLA. So for example, the SLA doesn't protect against data loss due to user errors, like accidentally deleting a volume or snapshot. Remember, AWS does operate under a shared responsibility model. So in order to protect your data and prevent accidental deletion of volumes, make sure you're backing up your volumes with EBS snapshots or AWS backup, which we previously discussed in another episode. And to further protect your snapshots, make sure that you're using the AWS Recycle Bin feature, where you can basically recover any accidentally deleted snapshots.
Thanks so much for watching. To keep up with future Learn with DoiT topics and episodes, and lots of other cloud expertise, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Looking for more help with Amazon EBS or other cloud computing challenges? Go to doit.com to learn more and talk with our experts.